The sound of a zipper closing shouldn't sound like a guillotine dropping, but in the silence of our master bedroom, that's exactly what it was. It severed 10 years of marriage in a single metallic hiss, leaving me standing there with my hands in my pockets, watching my life get packed into 3 Louis Vuitton bags. The sound of a zipper closing shouldn't sound like a guillotine dropping, but in the silence of our master bedroom, that's exactly what it was. It severed 10 years of marriage in a single metallic hiss, leaving me standing there with my hands in my pockets, watching my life get packed into 3 Louis Vuitton bags. Sarah didn't look angry. That would have been easier to handle. Anger implies passion. It implies that something still matters enough to burn for. Instead, she looked efficient. She moved around the room with the clinical detachment of a hotel maid, clearing out a guest who had overstayed his welcome. She checked the drawers, checked under the bed, and finally, checked her reflection in the vanity mirror one last time. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Mark," she said, smoothing a stray hair. She didn't turn to look at me. She spoke to my reflection in the glass. "Please don't do the pleading thing. It's exhausted." "I haven't said a word," I replied. My voice sounded foreign, scratchy, like I hadn't used it in days. "I'm just standing here." That's the problem. That's always the problem. She finally turned. Her eyes were dry, clear, and terrifyingly pitying. "You just stand there. You're like a piece of furniture, Mark, reliable, sturdy, and completely invisible after a while." I felt a sharp constriction in my chest, but I refused to let it show. I had been a landscape architect for 15 years. I knew that stability was what kept structures from collapsing, what kept the earth from sliding away in the rain. I thought stability was a virtue. I thought being the man who paid the mortgage early, who fixed the leaking sink without being asked, who remembered her mother's birthday, I thought that was love. "Is it Julian?" I asked. I didn't need to ask, but I needed to hear her say it. She paused, her hand hovering over the handle of her carry-on. "Julian is exciting. He has a vision for his life. He moves forward. You, Mark? You're stationary. You've been working on the same backyard designs, driving the same truck, eating the same turkey sandwich for lunch since I met you." "We were happy," I said, realizing how weak it sounded the moment the words hit the air. "You were happy," she corrected. "I was suffocating. I'm 34, Mark. I look good. I have potential. I'm not going to spend the second half of my life watching you fall asleep in front of the History Channel." She wheeled the bags toward the door. I didn't move to stop her. I didn't block her path. I knew that if I touched her arm, if I tried to beg, I would lose the only thing I had left, my dignity. At the doorway, she stopped. She looked around the hallway I had painted just last month because she said the old color was depressing. She looked at the framed photos of our trips, the carefully curated life we had built. Then she looked at me. "I'm doing you a favor, honestly," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than a scream. "You need someone as simple as you are. But you won't find her, because women today want more than just safe." "Sarah, don't," I warned, my hands balling into fists in my pockets. She shook her head, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "You're a good man, Mark, but good men are boring, and boring men get left behind." She gripped the handle of her suitcase tighter. "You're going to die alone. You know that, right? You don't have the fight in you to keep anyone." The front door opened. The cool evening air rushed in, smelling of rain and asphalt. A car engine idled in the driveway, a low, expensive purr. Julian. "Goodbye, Mark," she said. The door clicked shut. I stood in the hallway for a long time. The silence of the house was instant and heavy. It pressed against my eardrums. I walked into the living room and sat on the sofa. The cushion beside me still held the indentation of where she had been sitting an hour ago, scrolling through her phone, texting the man who was now driving her away. "You're going to die alone." The words didn't echo, they settled. They settled into the dust motes dancing in the slat of light coming from the street lamp outside. They settled into the cold coffee on the table. They settled into the marrow of my bones. I looked around the house. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a dual-income mortgage, no kids. She had always said, "Not yet," and now I knew why. It was just me and the drywall. I walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared at the contents. 2 yogurts, a carton of milk, a bottle of white wine she liked. I took the wine out, walked to the sink, and poured it down the drain. It wasn't an act of anger. It was just cleanup. I didn't cry that night. Crying would have been a relief. Instead, I sat in the dark, listening to the house settle, feeling the terrifying accuracy of her prediction wrapping around my throat. I was 40 years old. I was a man who built foundations for other people's gardens, but my own ground had just turned to quicksand. Die alone. It wasn't a curse. It sounded like a sentence. The silence didn't lift when the sun came up. It simply changed texture, shifting from the heavy, suffocating weight of the night to a sharp, exposing brightness that illuminated every dust mote and every empty space where Sarah's things used to be. I went to work the next morning. It was a reflex, a muscle memory born of 20 years of discipline. I drove to the site in West Hollywood, a sprawling residential project with tiered gardens and imported Japanese maples. I stood there with my clipboard, directing the crew, discussing drainage gradients and soil pH levels. I spoke the language of earth and stone, but my mind was stuck on a loop of the previous night's conversation. Boring, stationary, die alone. By noon, I couldn't focus. The lines on the blueprints began to blur into the gray static of my own exhaustion. I left early, something I hadn't done in a decade. The following weeks were a blur of legal bureaucracy that moved with terrifying speed. Sarah wasn't lying about wanting to move forward. She had hit the ground running. Her lawyer was a shark in a charcoal suit, a man who spoke about the dissolution of my marriage with the same emotional investment as someone ordering a sandwich. "The terms are standard, Mr. Vance," the lawyer said, sliding a thick packet of documents across the mahogany table. "Sarah is not asking for spousal support. She wants a clean break. She keeps the Audi, you keep the truck. You split the equity in the house, or you buy her out within 90 days. I picked up the papers. The dates caught my eye. Some of these financial disclosures had been prepared 3 months ago. "Wait," I said, my finger trembling slightly against the paper. "These are dated from August." The lawyer didn't blink. Yes, that was when my client began the initial consultation. August. I felt the blood drain from my face. August was our 10th anniversary. We had gone to Napa Valley. We had sat on a patio overlooking the vineyards at sunset. I had given her a diamond tennis bracelet. She had cried and told me she felt safe with me. She had held my hand across the table and toasted to our next decade. She was already meeting with divorce lawyers. She was already sleeping with Julian. She was planning this while we were on vacation, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow to the gut. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a performance. She hadn't just left me, she had been managing me. She had been keeping me calm and compliant while she built her exit ramp. The lawyer checked his watch. "Mr. Vance, the emotional context, while unfortunate, is irrelevant to the division of assets. Do you intend to contest?" I signed the papers. I didn't have the energy to fight. What was there to fight for? You can't litigate someone into loving you. The hardest part wasn't the legal meetings, it was the evenings. The house, once a sanctuary, transformed into a museum of failure. I walked through the rooms, and the echo of my own footsteps was mocking. I found myself doing irrational things. I kept the thermostat at the temperature she liked, 72 degrees, even though I preferred it cooler. I bought the brand of coffee she drank, then realized I hated the taste and poured it out. One night, about a month after she left, I made the mistake of looking her up online. I knew I shouldn't. It's the modern form of self-flagellation, scrolling through the curated happiness of the person who destroyed you. There she was. Instagram. A photo posted 2 hours ago. She was in Cabo. She was wearing a white dress I had never seen, holding a champagne flute. Her arm was draped around a man, Julian. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way. Silver fox hair, blindingly white teeth. The kind of guy who wore loafers without socks and owned a tech startup. The caption read, "Finally breathing. #new chapter. #soulmate." The comments were full of her friends, people who had eaten at my dinner table, people I had known for years, cheering her on. "You deserve this. So happy for you." I felt a wave of nausea. I wasn't just divorced, I was erased. My stability, my loyalty, my quiet support. It all meant nothing against the backdrop of a Cabo sunset and a man with a faster car. To the world, I was just the starter husband, the practice run. I threw my phone onto the couch and walked into the garage. It was my workspace, the only place that felt entirely mine. My tools were hung on pegboards, outlined in marker. My drafting table was in the corner. I sat on the cold concrete floor, my back against the tire of my truck. I looked at the table saw, the drill press, the things I used to build and fix. I could fix a broken deck. I could fix a drainage issue. I could fix a dying oak tree. But I couldn't fix the fact that I was fundamentally insufficient for the person I loved. The silence of the garage was absolute. No traffic noise, no wind, just the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. You're going to die alone. The fear wasn't about death. It was about the distance between now and then. It was about 40 more years of this silence. It was about coming home every day to a house that didn't care if I unlocked the door or not. I pulled my knees to my chest and buried my face in my hands. For the first time since the zipper hissed shut, I let go. I didn't weep gracefully. I unraveled. I gasped for air in the quiet dark of the garage, mourning not just the loss of my wife, but the loss of my own self-worth. I was 40, divorced, and according to the woman who knew me best, completely unlovable. I had hit the bottom of the well, and when I looked up, there was no light. The weeks that followed my meltdown in the garage were defined by a desperate, clumsy attempt to fill the void. I became a man obsessed with noise. I left the television on when I wasn't watching it. I listened to podcasts while I showered. I bought a secondhand piano and spent hours fumbling through scales just to hear something other than the settling of the house's foundation. My friends, the few who hadn't sided with Sarah or drifted away in the awkward aftermath, tried to help in the only way modern society knows how. They told me to get back out there. "You're a catch, Mark," my buddy Greg told me over beers one Tuesday. "You own a house, you have a business, you have all your teeth. Just download the apps." I tried. I really did. I downloaded a popular dating app and stared at the glowing interface. It felt like walking into a crowded meat market blindfolded. I swiped through faces, women posing at Machu Picchu, women holding glasses of wine, women with filters that smoothed their skin into plastic perfection. I matched with a woman named Linda. We exchanged 3 messages. She asked what I did for fun. I typed, "I like gardening and restoring old furniture." I watched the 3 dots of her typing bubble appear, then disappear. She never wrote back. Boring. I deleted the app that night. Sarah was right. I didn't have the energy to market myself. I didn't want to perform. I wanted a life, not an audition. If my fate was to be the solitary man in the big house, I decided I would just have to learn to live with the echo. To avoid the empty evenings, I started spending my Wednesday nights at O'Malley's, a dive bar near the edge of town that smelled of lemon polish and stale hops. It wasn't the kind of place Sarah would have ever set foot in, which made it perfect. It was there that I ran into David. We had gone to high school together, but our paths had diverged sharply. While I was designing manicured lawns for the wealthy, David had gone into social work. He looked 10 years older than me, his face lined with the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying other people's trauma. He slid into the booth opposite me without asking, placing a thick manila folder on the sticky table. "Rough day?" I asked, signaling the waitress for another round. "Rough life," David grunted, loosening his tie. "I spent 6 hours today trying to find a placement for a kid who's been kicked out of 3 homes in 6 months. The system is broken, Mark. It's a conveyor belt to prison." I nodded, sipping my beer. Usually, I would have tuned out. I had my own problems. But that night, the silence in my own head was so loud, I needed someone else's chaos to drown it out. "What's the kid's deal?" I asked. "Leo," David sighed, rubbing his temples. 14 years old, smart as a whip but angry. God, is he angry. His dad took off when he was a baby. Mom overdosed 2 years ago. No next of kin. He's been bounced around the system since the funeral. He fights. He steals small things. He mouths off. Foster families want cute toddlers they can mold. They don't want a teenage boy with a chip on his shoulder the size of a boulder. So what happens to him? David took a long pull of his beer. Group home. Probably juvenile detention eventually. He's aging out of the adoptable window. Once they hit 13, nobody wants them. They're damaged goods. Damaged goods. The phrase hung in the air between us. I looked at the condensation dripping down my glass. I thought about Sarah calling me furniture. I thought about being discarded because I didn't fit the shiny, exciting narrative she wanted for her life. I thought about this kid, Leo, being written off before he even had a chance to start, simply because he was difficult, because he wasn't the perfect accessory for a family photo. "Is he a bad kid?" I asked. David looked at me, his eyes sharp. "There are no bad kids, Mark. Just kids who have learned that the only way to survive is to push people away before they get pushed away first. It's a defense mechanism." He screams, "Leave me alone," because he's terrified everyone is going to leave anyway. I felt a sudden strange kinship with a 14-year-old boy I had never met. We were both standing in the wreckage of abandonment, dealing with it in opposite ways. I had turned inward, becoming silent and stationary. Leo had turned outward, becoming loud and destructive. But the root was the same. We were both waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Does he like doing anything?" I asked, "besides fighting?" David laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Oddly enough, the last foster dad said the only time the kid was quiet was when he was outside. Said he liked digging holes in the yard, probably imagining he was burying the world. I looked at my hands, hands that knew soil. Hands that knew how to take something broken and wild and give it structure, give it a place to grow. I wasn't exciting. I wasn't a silver fox with a tech startup, but I had a 4-bedroom house that was collecting dust. I had stability. "I have a spare room," I said. The words came out before I had actually processed them. David froze, his beer halfway to his mouth. He lowered it slowly. "Mark, don't joke." "I'm not joking," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I have a big house. I have a clean record. I've been background checked a dozen times for my government contracts." "You're going through a divorce," David said, his tone shifting from friend to social worker. "You're grieving. You're not in a place to take on a project, especially not a kid like Leo. He will eat you alive. He will find every insecurity you have and press on it until you break." "Sarah said I was boring," I said, meeting David's eyes. "She said I was invisible. Maybe that's what this kid needs. Someone who isn't going to try to change him. Someone who is just there. Like furniture, sturdy." David stared at me for a long time. He seemed to be weighing the desperation of his caseload against the fragility of my mental state. Finally, he opened the manila folder and slid a photo across the table. It was a mugshot-style picture from a school ID. The boy had dark, messy hair and eyes that looked older than mine. There was no smile. His jaw was set in a defiant line, challenging the camera, challenging the world to hurt him again. I looked at Leo, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the crushing weight of my own loneliness. I felt a spark of something else, something dangerous, something necessary. "Tell me what I need to do," I said. The first thing Leo brought into my pristine, silent house was a black plastic trash bag and a smell that was a mix of stale cigarette smoke and cheap body spray. It hung in the foyer, an invasive scent that immediately clashed with the lavender diffuser Sarah had left behind. David stood by the door, looking anxious. "Call me, day or night. Seriously, Mark." Then he left, and I was alone with a stranger in my hallway. Leo was taller than he looked in the photo. He was gangly, all elbows and knees, wearing a hoodie that was 2 sizes too big, the hood pulled up to cast a shadow over his eyes. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, at the expensive hardwood I had refinished myself. He was vibrating with a restless energy, like a trapped animal waiting for a gap in the fence. "So," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the cavernous space, "that's your room upstairs." "The one on the left. Bathroom is across the hall." Leo shifted the trash bag onto his shoulder. "Cool. What are the rules?" "Rules?" "Yeah, no food in the room, no lights after 10, don't look at you directly." He finally looked up, and his eyes were dark, intelligent, and exhausted. "Every house has a list. Just give it to me so I know when I break one." "Just try not to burn the house down," I said, attempting a joke. Leo didn't smile. He stared at me for a second longer, assessing me like I was a puzzle he had already solved, then turned and walked up the stairs. The door to the guest room, his room, slammed shut. The house shook. The silence returned, but now it was charged with tension. The first week was a disaster. I had imagined, in my naive arrogance, that I would be the mentor. I thought we would bond over projects. I thought I would offer stability, and he would offer gratitude. I was an idiot. Leo was a ghost in the house. He came down only to grab food, which he took back to his room like a hoarding squirrel. When I tried to engage him, he gave me one-word answers: fine, no, whatever. But the silence wasn't peaceful, it was hostile. He left lights on. He left muddy footprints on the carpet. He played music loud enough to vibrate the floorboards, aggressive rap that filled the house with profanity and rage. On Friday night, I reached my breaking point. I had cooked a roast chicken, simple, hearty food. I knocked on his door. "Dinner," I called out. "Not hungry," came the muffled reply. "I didn't ask if you were hungry. I said it's dinner. We eat at the table." There was a long pause. Then the door jerked open. Leo stood there, wearing headphones around his neck. "You want to play house? Fine, let's play house." He marched downstairs, sat at the table, and stared at me while I carved the chicken. The sound of the knife against the ceramic platter was agonizingly loud. "So," I said, serving him a portion, "David tells me you like being outside." Leo stabbed a potato with his fork. "David talks too much." "I own a landscape architecture firm. We design gardens, parks. It's good work, physical, honest." "It's gardening," Leo sneered. "You plant flowers for rich people who don't look at them." "It's more than that," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's about structure. It's about creating an ecosystem that survives." Leo dropped his fork. It clattered against the plate. "You know what I think? I think you're lonely. I think your wife dumped you, and you got a dog, but the dog died, so you got a kid instead." The air left the room. My hand froze mid-bite. "How do you know about my wife?" I asked quietly. "David left your file on the seat of his car," Leo said, a cruel smirk touching his lips. I read it. Subject recently divorced, no children, seeking purpose. That's what it said, seeking purpose. He leaned forward. "I'm not your therapy dog, man. I'm not here to make you feel better about being a loser who couldn't keep his wife happy." The words were precision-guided missiles. They hit exactly where Sarah had struck. Boring. Loser. Can't keep anyone. I felt a flash of anger, hot and white, rise in my chest. I wanted to yell. I wanted to tell him he was an ungrateful brat who was heading straight for a jail cell. I wanted to tell him to pack his trash bag and get out. But then I looked at his hands. They were gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He wasn't just being mean. He was terrified. He was pushing the button. He was launching the nuke to see if I would survive the blast, or if I would crumble like everyone else. He wanted me to kick him out, because if I kicked him out now, it proved he was right. Nobody stays. It gave him control over the rejection. I took a breath. I picked up my fork. I cut a piece of chicken and ate it. "The potatoes need more salt," I said calmly. "Pass the shaker." Leo blinked. His mouth opened slightly. He was ready for a fight. He wasn't ready for a non-reaction. "Did you hear me?" he snapped. "I said you're a loser." "I heard you," I said, taking the salt shaker from the center of the table myself. "And you're rude. but the roast is getting cold and I worked hard on it. Eat." Leo stared at me. Confusion warred with anger on his face. He waited for the other shoe to drop, for the lecture, for the shouting. When it didn't come, he slowly picked up his fork. He didn't apologize. He didn't smile. But he ate. Later that night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I was exhausted. My chest ached from the insults he had hurled at me. Sarah's voice was loud in my head. "You can't handle complex emotion, Mark. You just stand there." Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just a stone wall absorbing blows. But as I listened to the house, I realized something. The music from Leo's room had stopped. For the first time in months, I wasn't the only living thing breathing in the dark. It wasn't a happy home, it was a battlefield. But at least it wasn't empty. I closed my eyes. I didn't know if I could fix him. I didn't know if I could even like him. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him win. I wasn't going to let him drive me away from my own table. The phone call came at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, shattering the rhythmic calm of my workday. It was the vice principal of the local high school. Her voice was tight, clipped, and dripping with the kind of bureaucratic prejudice I had learned to despise. "Mr. Vance, we need you to come to the school immediately. There has been an incident involving Leo. The police are here." The words "police are here" turned my blood to ice water. I didn't ask questions. I dropped my clipboard, left a confused foreman in charge of the leveling crew, and drove my truck like I was fleeing a crime scene. When I walked into the administrative office, the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. Leo was sitting in a plastic chair in the corner, slumped over, his hood up, his knee bouncing violently. Standing over him were two uniformed officers and Vice Principal Mrs. Gable, a woman who wore her authority like a weapon. Leo looked up when I entered. For a split second, I saw panic in his eyes, raw, terrified panic, before the mask of indifference slammed back down. He expected me to be angry. He expected me to be embarrassed. He expected the lecture. "Mr. Vance," Mrs. Gable said, not offering her hand, "thank you for coming. We have a serious situation. A teacher's purse was stolen from the break room during third period. $200 cash and credit cards are missing." "And you think Leo took it?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "He was seen in the hallway near the break room," Officer Miller, the older of the two policemen, interjected. He had his thumbs hooked in his belt, looming over the boy. And given the young man's history and his record of petty theft in his previous placements, it's a fairly straight line to draw. I looked at Leo. He was staring at his sneakers, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He wasn't defending himself. He had learned long ago that his voice didn't matter in rooms like this. To them, he wasn't a child, he was a statistic. He was a problem to be solved, removed, and filed away. "Did you find the purse on him?" I asked, turning back to the officer. "No," the officer admitted. "We searched his backpack and locker. Nothing yet. But he likely handed it off or stashed it. We need him to come down to the station for further questioning. Get a formal statement." "He's not going anywhere," I said. The room went silent. Mrs. Gable blinked, confused. "Mr. Vance, I don't think you understand. We have a zero-tolerance policy. And honestly, with a kid like this, you have to expect—" "A kid like what?" I interrupted, stepping fully into the room. I didn't shout. I didn't wave my arms. I stood still, planting my feet on the carpet with the same immovability I used when arguing with city planners. I was the furniture, remember? I was the stone wall. "You have no physical evidence," I continued, my voice low and steady. "You have no witnesses who saw him enter the room. You have a missing item and a foster kid in the hallway. That's circumstantial at best and harassment at worst." "We are doing our job," the officer snapped, stepping forward. "And I'm doing mine," I said, stepping between the officer and Leo. I felt Leo flinch behind me, but I didn't move. I blocked their view of him. I became his shield. "I am his guardian, and you are profiling a minor. If you want to take him to the station, you will need to arrest him. If you arrest him without evidence, I will have my lawyer at the precinct before you can finish paperwork. and I will sue this district and this department for wrongful detainment so fast your heads will spin. I didn't have a lawyer on retainer like that. I didn't have Sarah's shark, but they didn't know that. They just saw a middle-aged white man in a work shirt who spoke with the absolute boring certainty of someone who knew the rules better than they did. Mrs. Gable looked at the officer. The officer looked at me. He saw the set of my jaw. He saw that I wasn't going to blink. We will continue the investigation," the officer muttered, backing down. "But if we find proof—" "If you find proof, call me," I said. "Until then, we are leaving." I turned to Leo. "Get your bag." Leo stood up slowly, looking at me like I had just grown a second head. He grabbed his backpack and we walked out of the office, down the long hallway and out into the parking lot. We didn't speak. I unlocked the truck and we climbed in. I drove 2 blocks before I pulled over into a side street and killed the engine. The silence in the cab was deafening. "Did you do it?" I asked, looking straight ahead through the windshield. "No," Leo said. His voice cracked. "Okay," I said. I reached for the ignition. "That's it?" Leo asked, his voice rising, turning into that familiar defensive anger. "You believe me? Just like that? You aren't going to ask to check my pockets. You aren't going to tell me I'm embarrassing you." I turned to look at him. He was trembling. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him exposed. "Leo," I said, "I don't care about the $200. I care that they treated you like trash. You live in my house. You eat at my table. That means you're with me, and nobody treats my family like that." My family. The word hung in the air, heavy and strange. Leo stared at me, his eyes wide, searching my face for the lie, for the trick. He was waiting for the "but." "But you have to be better. But you owe me." There was no but. "Sarah told me I was boring," I said quietly, gripping the steering wheel. "She said I was too safe, too loyal." Well, maybe she was right. I am loyal. I'm the guy who stays, and right now, I'm staying with you. So if the world wants to come at you, they have to go through me first. Leo looked down at his lap. He bit his lip. Then, he let out a sound, a choked, ragged sob that he tried desperately to stifle. He pulled his hood down over his face and turned toward the window, his shoulders shaking. I didn't try to hug him. I knew he wasn't ready for that. I just sat there, stationary as ever, letting him cry. I started the engine and put the truck in gear, driving us home. We stopped for burgers on the way. We didn't talk much, but the silence had changed again. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was the comfortable silence of 2 soldiers sharing a foxhole. That night, for the first time, Leo didn't slam his door. He left it open a crack. And when I walked past to go to my own empty room, I heard a mumble from the darkness. "Thanks, Mark." It was barely a whisper, but it was the loudest thing I had heard in months. I went to bed and slept without the TV on. I realized I didn't feel like furniture anymore. I felt like a foundation, and for the first time since Sarah left, I knew I was building something that would actually last. Time is a strange architect. It doesn't build in straight lines. It builds in layers. 3 years had passed since the night the zipper hissed shut, and the layers of my life had completely reshaped the landscape. I was 43 now. My hair had a little more salt in the pepper, and my hands were rougher from spending less time at the drafting table and more time in the dirt. I wasn't just designing gardens anymore. I was building community spaces. My firm had shifted focus, taking on projects that mattered: urban renewal, school playgrounds, therapy gardens for hospitals. It was Leo's influence, though he would never admit it. He had taught me that things don't need to be perfect to be beautiful, they just need to be alive. I saw Sarah on a Tuesday in November. It was the first time I had seen her in the flesh since the day she left. I was at a charity gala for the city's Botanical Society, standing near the bar in a suit that I had actually bought for myself, not one she had picked out. I held a glass of bourbon and watched the room. And then, there she was. She looked stunning in the way a diamond looks stunning, cold, hard, and expensive. She was wearing a red dress that was cut aggressively low, the kind of dress that demands attention. She was clinging to Julian's arm. Julian hadn't aged well. The silver fox charm had curdled into something brittle. He looked tired, his eyes darting around the room, scanning for someone more important, someone younger, someone new. I watched them from the shadows of a ficus tree. I saw the dynamic instantly. It was a play I recognized, only the roles were reversed. Sarah was talking animatedly, laughing too loud at his jokes, her hand constantly touching his chest, his arm, his shoulder. She was performing. She was doing exactly what I used to do, working overtime to keep the attention of someone who was already halfway out the door. I saw Julian gently remove her hand from his arm so he could check his phone. I saw the flicker of panic in Sarah's eyes, a microscopic crack in the porcelain finish. She looked around the room, her smile tight, terrified that someone had seen her relevance slip. She caught my eye. For a second, the noise of the gala faded. She stared at me. I didn't look away. I didn't feel the old constriction in my chest. I didn't feel the urge to hide. I just raised my glass slightly in a silent, polite acknowledgement. Her eyes widened. She took in my fitted suit, my calm posture, the fact that I wasn't standing alone in a corner looking miserable. A confused, almost hurt expression crossed her face. She expected me to be the wreckage she left behind. She didn't expect the ruins to rebuild themselves into a fortress. Julian tugged at her elbow, whispering something in her ear without looking at her. She flinched, her mask slipping back into place, and allowed herself to be led away toward the VIP tables. I finished my drink and left. I didn't need to see more. I knew that look. It was the look of someone who had chased the horizon, only to find out it was just a painting on a wall. She had excitement, yes, but she had no peace. I drove home, the silence of the truck comfortable and familiar. When I pulled into the driveway, the house wasn't dark. Every light on the first floor was blazing. I walked in to the sound of chaos. No, you can't put metal in the microwave, you genius. It's not metal, it's foil-lined. It's different. It's sparks, Leo. Sparks mean fire. Fire means Mark kills us. I stepped into the kitchen to find Leo and his girlfriend, Maya, standing amidst a disaster of flour and tomato sauce. Leo was 17 now. He had shot up 6 inches, filling out his frame with the lean muscle of a varsity soccer player. The angry, hooded kid with the shifty eyes was gone. In his place was a young man who laughed with his whole chest. "Hey!" Leo shouted, spotting me. He didn't flinch. He didn't hide. "Tell Maya that the little silver rim on the plate doesn't count as metal." "It absolutely counts," I said, loosening my tie and throwing my jacket over a chair. "And if you blew up my microwave, it's coming out of your college fund." "See," Maya grinned, nudging Leo. "Mark's on my side. He understands science." Leo rolled his eyes, but he was smiling. "Whatever. We made pizza. It looks ugly, but it's edible." I leaned against the counter, watching them. Leo was scraping a misshapen lump of dough off a baking sheet. He was happy. Not the manic, high-stakes happiness Sarah was chasing at the gala, but a deep-rooted contentment. 3 years ago, this boy wouldn't look me in the eye. 3 years ago, he was waiting for me to throw him away. Now he was arguing about microwave physics in my kitchen, wearing one of my old t-shirts. "How was the fancy party?" Leo asked, grabbing a slice of the deformed pizza. "Did you rub elbows with the elites?" "It was fine," I said, grabbing a slice myself. It was undercooked and burned at the same time. It was delicious. "Saw some old ghosts. Reminded me why I like the living." Leo paused, looking at me. He was sharp. He always had been. He knew who I meant. "She see you?" he asked quietly. "Yeah." "She look happy?" I thought about the panic in Sarah's eyes, the way she clutched Julian's arm like a life raft. She looked busy. Leo nodded, a wisdom beyond his years in his expression. "Busy isn't happy." "No," I agreed, "it isn't." I looked around the kitchen. It was messy. There was flour on the floor. There were dishes in the sink. It was loud and imperfect and smelled of burnt cheese. Sarah had predicted I would die alone because I was boring. She thought love was about fireworks and grand gestures and constant motion. She didn't understand that the strongest love is the kind that just sits with you in the kitchen on a Tuesday night, eating bad pizza and laughing about nothing. I wasn't dying alone. I was living, and for the first time, I realized that the boring life I offered was actually a luxury she could no longer afford. "Hey," I said, dusting flour off the counter. "Finish up. You've got practice in the morning. And clean this mess or you're mowing the lawn for a month." "Tyrant," Leo muttered, but he grabbed the sponge. I walked upstairs to change, leaving the door open so I could hear their laughter drifting up the stairs. The house was full. My life was full. And as I unbuttoned my shirt, looking in the mirror, I didn't see a piece of furniture. I saw a man who had survived the storm and planted a garden in the floodwaters. May in California brings a specific kind of heat. Dry, bright, and relentless. It was the kind of day that made the asphalt shimmer. But I didn't feel the temperature. I was sitting on the hard metal bleachers of the district football stadium, surrounded by 2,000 cheering parents, straining my eyes toward the stage setup on the 50-yard line. Beside me, Maya was practically vibrating. She held an air horn in her lap, her thumb hovering over the trigger. "Not yet," I warned, smiling without looking at her. "Wait for the name." I know," she whispered, "but I'm nervous. He's going to trip. He said he was going to trip." "He won't trip," I said. "He's got good balance. He's a survivor." The principal approached the microphone. The list of names had been a drone of syllables for the last hour, but the silence inside my head suddenly amplified. Leo Vance. He hadn't legally changed his name. We never did the formal adoption papers. By the time we stabilized, he was almost 18. But he had asked the school to read it that way. It was a choice, a declaration. I watched the young man walk across the stage. The black gown billowed around him. He wasn't looking at his feet. He was looking straight out into the crowd, scanning the sea of faces until he found us. When he did, he didn't wave. He just nodded. A sharp, affirmative nod. "I'm here. We made it." Maya blasted the air horn. I stood up and clapped until my palms stung, ignoring the glare of the mother in front of me. I felt a lump in my throat the size of a fist. I remembered the kid with the trash bag. I remembered the police station. I remembered the anger that used to radiate off him like heat waves. And now, I saw a young man holding a diploma, heading to college on a scholarship he had earned with grit and late-night studying at my kitchen table. After the ceremony, the field was a chaotic swarm of blue gowns and bouquets. I found him near the goalposts, laughing with a group of friends. When he saw me, he broke away from the circle. "Did I trip?" he asked, grinning. "You floated," I said. I reached out and pulled him into a hug. It wasn't the stiff, awkward pat on the back of 3 years ago. It was a real embrace. He squeezed back, hard. "Thanks, Dad," he mumbled into my shoulder. He had started calling me that 6 months ago. The first time, I had to go into the garage and pretend to organize screws so he wouldn't see me tear up. Today, I just held him tighter. "Hey, look here!" Maya shouted. We turned. She was holding up her phone. I didn't have time to pose. I didn't fix my tie. I didn't suck in my stomach. I just kept my arm around Leo's shoulders, and he leaned his head against mine, both of us laughing at Maya's enthusiasm. The shutter clicked. Later that evening, while the house was quiet, Leo was out at a grad party. I sat on the patio with a glass of iced tea. I opened my phone. Maya had sent me the picture. It was perfect because it was flawed. The lighting was harsh sunlight. My hair was windblown. Leo's cap was crooked. But the expression on our faces was undeniable. It was raw, unfiltered joy. It was the look of two people who had pulled each other out of the quicksand. I did something I hadn't done in years. I posted it to social media. I didn't use any hashtags. I didn't write a paragraph about the journey. I just wrote 2 words: my family. I put the phone down and watched the fireflies in the garden. I didn't care about the likes. I just wanted to document the victory. Across town, in a sleek, minimalist condo that smelled of expensive candles and neglect, Sarah was scrolling. Julian wasn't home. He was at a networking dinner, which was code for something she didn't want to investigate too closely. Her life had become a series of managed anxieties. She spent her days at the gym, her afternoons shopping for things she didn't need, and her evenings waiting for a man who made her feel lonely even when he was in the room. She refreshed her feed. The algorithm, cruel and efficient, surfaced the post because they still had 50 mutual friends who were reacting to it. The image filled her screen. She stopped breathing for a moment. She stared at Mark. He looked older, yes. The lines around his eyes were deeper. But he didn't look like the furniture she had described. He looked vibrant. He looked solid. He looked happy. And the boy. She recognized him vaguely from stories she had heard through the grapevine. The troubled teen Mark had taken in. The charity case. But the boy in the photo didn't look like a charity case. He looked at Mark with a fierce, protective adoration that Julian had never shown her. She looked at the caption. My family. 2 words. No explanation. No justification. Just a simple fact. Sarah felt a crack in her chest. She looked around her living room. White leather sofas, glass tables, abstract art. It was beautiful. He was magazine ready. And it was completely cold. She zoomed in on Mark's face again. There was a piece there that she couldn't buy, no matter how many trips to Cabo she took. She had left him because she thought he would drag her down into a boring, stagnant life. She thought he would die alone. But looking at the screen, seeing the hundreds of likes, the comments from people saying, "Congratulations," and "Beautiful duo," the truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. Mark hadn't died alone. He had built a life. He had built a legacy. She was the one sitting in the silence. She was the one waiting for a text message that wasn't coming. She was the one who had traded a foundation for a facade. Her thumb hovered over the like button. Her hand trembled. She wanted to be part of that warmth. She wanted to acknowledge that he had won, but she couldn't. The shame was too heavy. She swiped past the photo, tossing her phone onto the empty cushion beside her. She pulled her knees to her chest in the quiet, expensive room, and for the first time in years, she let herself feel the terrifying weight of her own prediction. Die alone. It wasn't a curse she had cast on him. It was a destiny she had chosen for herself. 3 days after the photo went up, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't saved, but one I would never forget. The digits were etched into my memory like a social security number or a childhood address. Can we talk? Coffee? Sarah. I stared at the screen. 3 years ago, that message would have sent my heart into arrhythmia. I would have analyzed the punctuation, the timing, the tone. I would have rushed to say yes, desperate for a crumb of her attention. Now, I just felt a mild inconvenience. I had a meeting with a supplier in an hour, and I promised Leo I'd look at the transmission on his car later. I typed back. I have 30 minutes at 4 p.m., the Starbucks on 5th. She was there before me. That was new. Sarah was chronically late to everything during our marriage, usually because she was perfecting her eyeliner or changing her shoes for the 3rd time. Today she was sitting at a corner table, clutching a latte like it was a hand warmer. When I walked in, she stood up. She looked tired. The expensive makeup was there, the designer clothes were there, but the light behind her eyes was dim. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been left out in the rain, still beautiful, but with hairline fractures beginning to show. "Mark," she said, offering a hesitant smile. "You look different." "I am different," I said, sitting down. I didn't take off my coat. "How are you, Sarah?" "I'm okay," she lied. I could hear the tremor in her voice. "Julian and I, things are complicated. He's very focused on his career right now. It's lonely." She let the word hang there, a bait she expected me to take. When I didn't speak, she continued, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I saw the picture of you and the boy. Leo? He's handsome. You look so proud." "I am," I said simply. "He's a good kid. He's going to state in the fall." "That's amazing," she whispered. She looked down at the table. "You know, I was thinking about what I said, the day I left, about you being boring, about dying alone." I leaned back in the chair. "I remember. I was cruel, she said, her eyes meeting mine, glistening with tears that felt practiced yet desperate. I was chasing something flashy, but flash burns out, Mark. I miss the quiet. I miss knowing someone is there. I miss the safety. She reached across the table, her hand inching toward mine. Do you think, is there any world where we could try again? Maybe just dinner? Julian is moving out next week. I'll be alone in the condo. It's so big when it's empty. I looked at her hand. It was manicured, perfect, and completely unfamiliar. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no vindication. Just a profound sense of distance. She was a stranger who knew my history, but not my present. I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't take hers. I placed my hands on the table, clasped together. Sarah, I said gently, you didn't leave because I was boring. You left because you didn't know how to be still. And you're not here because you miss me. You're here because you're scared of the silence you created. Her face crumbled slightly. That's not fair. It is fair, I corrected. You told me I would die alone because I didn't have a spark. But you were wrong about what that means. You think not dying alone means having a husband in the house or a date to a gala. It doesn't. I stood up. I checked my watch. I wasn't playing a game. I genuinely had somewhere to be. I have a son waiting for me, I said. I have a community garden project breaking ground tomorrow. I have a life that is full of noise and mess and trouble and love. I don't have space for someone who only wants me when her other options fail. So that's it? She asked, her voice rising, a flash of the old entitlement coming through. You're just going to walk away? After 10 years? I didn't walk away, Sarah. You did. I just kept walking. I turned and headed for the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see her reaction. Her chapter in my book was closed, and the ink was dry. I drove home with the windows down. The air smelled of cut grass and approaching summer. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Leo under the hood of his beat-up sedan, grease smeared across his forehead. Maya was sitting on the curb, reading a textbook aloud to him. Pass me the wrench, Leo grunted. The big one or the little one? Maya asked. The torque wrench, Maya, the clicky one. Don't get an attitude with me, or I'll read the chapter on cellular respiration again. I parked the truck and walked up the driveway. Need a hand? I asked. Leo looked up, grinning. Thought you were having coffee with the past. I was, I said, rolling up my sleeves. It was cold. I took the wrench from Maya and leaned over the engine block next to my son. We worked in silence for a while, the comfortable, productive silence of men fixing something broken. Sarah had been terrified of dying alone. She thought it was a physical state, a room with one chair. But as I watched Leo wipe his hands on a rag and laugh at something Maya said, I understood the truth. Dying alone isn't about who is sitting next to your bed in the final hour. It's about the vacancy you leave behind. If you live a life entirely for yourself, consuming people like products, chasing the next high, you die alone even if the room is full, because you haven't left a part of yourself in anyone else. But if you give, if you take a scared, angry kid and give him a home, if you build a garden where there was once only dirt, if you show up when it's hard and stay when it's boring, you never really die. You live on in the foundations you built. Hey, Dad, Leo said, slamming the hood shut. Engine sounds good. Listen. He turned the key. The engine roared to life, strong and steady. Sounds perfect, I said. I looked at the house, the garden, and the two young people standing in the golden hour light. I wasn't just furniture. I was the earth beneath their feet, and that was enough.